The Desolation of Smaug is actually a pretty good movie. Yeah, I know that The Hobbit gets a lot of hate online, but I honestly don't think that the Hobbit trilogy is as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. And today, in this second part of my mini-series, we're going to be taking a look at the second film in the trilogy, The Desolation of Smaug. If you haven't seen part 1, where I give my thoughts on an unexpected journey, and would like to watch that video before watching this one, the link to that video will be in the description. But anyways, let's jump right back into it with The Desolation of Smaug. So just like an unexpected journey, Desolation of Smaug also starts out with a prologue. And while this scene certainly isn't as good or important as the prologue of the whole trilogy, I still enjoyed it quite a bit. It doesn't really give us much new information that we don't already know, but it's a nice ease back into the trilogy. The first big scene that we get is the scene at Beorn's house. And I thought that this sequence was okay. Nothing particularly great happens here, but this scene accomplishes 3 things. 1, it's just another stepping stone for our dwarves in their quest towards Erebor. 2, it separates Gandalf from the rest of the company for the rest of the movie, which I did not like at all. And 3, it replaces Azog with an even more boring and less interesting version of himself, Bolg. God, Bolg is impressively uninteresting. He is the absolute definition of one-dimensional. At least Azog has somewhat of a motivation, but I'm still trying to figure out to this day what the hell Bolg wanted outside of his natural orc tendencies to kill people. But anyways, our company of dwarves make their way into Mirkwood Forrest, and I do think that this scene is pretty good. As much as I don't like the fact that Gandalf left the company, it does give everything revolving around the company from now on a little more tension because they no longer have that cushion of Gandalf's power like they did before. I liked seeing them all struggle to make it through the challenges of the forest, but I think where the scene drops a little bit in quality for me is when the spiders show up, and it largely has to do with the fact that the spiders can talk. And yeah, I know you can only hear them when Bilbo is wearing the ring, but regardless, it just feels kind of dumb to me and largely reduces the creepy factor of the spiders compared to how they were portrayed in The Lord of the Rings. And it kind of took me out of the whole fight sequence that takes up the rest of the scene. So the dwarves are about to get served as the main course for dinner, but are saved just in time by the elves. Oh look, it's Legolas! But the elves aren't really saving them, they're more so just capturing them just because, I guess. So the elves take the dwarves minus Bilbo, because he avoided being captured, to the kingdom of Mirkwood. And this is where Thorin is finally reunited with King Thranduil, which was definitely fun to see because I know that these two hate each other, but I do wish there was a little more context as to why the dwarves and the Mirkwood elves hate each other so much. Yes, we do get a little bit of context in the prologue of An Unexpected Journey, but I really wish they would have expanded on this more so that the impact of these two reuniting felt a little more intense. I know that they do actually give us some extra scenes that explore this topic in the extended edition that I really wish they would have just kept in for the theatrical version. This part of the film is also the beginning of a pretty dumb love affair between Keely and Tariel, but I'll go more into depth about that in part 3. So Bilbo is able to use the Ring of Power to sneak past the guards and is able to free the dwarves from their cells. I really like how thus far we've seen a natural progression in Bilbo's abilities as the company's burglar, and I think it really sets up his ultimate test, which is later in the film, quite nicely. So as the dwarves are able to escape, we then transition into a major action escape sequence. And although I found this escape sequence to be wildly entertaining, I will concede that it plays out pretty stupid in some sections. The overuse of GoPro footage looked pretty bad and honestly didn't fit the style of the movie at all. Legolas performing acts that even seem pretty extreme for someone like Legolas. This part where Bomber just doesn't stop fucking rolling. Yeah, I can see how this scene has a lot of flaws. So I can see why some people may hate it. But you know how there are sometimes things that you watch and you know that they are objectively bad, but you still like them anyway? Well, this is one of those scenes for me. Perhaps it's just the energy of the scene, the cinematography, and the choreography that I like so much that helped me look past all those things. But anyways, as the dwarves escape the orcs and make their way downstream, we get our first introduction to Bard and the people of Lake Town. And by this point, I'd say that we've about reached the second half of the trilogy. And by far, the biggest problem with the back half of the trilogy is the people of Lake Town. There is so much time dedicated to these people from here on out, and even after all the screen time that they get, I just can't bring myself to really care about them at all. They are not really particularly interesting in any way, and there isn't really any characters that I give a shit about. The only one that is somewhat decent is Bard, but even he mostly feels like an afterthought and an okay side character at best. And I especially feel that way about him in this film because he doesn't really do anything important that progresses the plot until Battle of the Five Armies. The people of Lake Town as a whole I'd say aren't that bad in this one, but by the time we get to Five Armies, they really start to become a tedious screen presence. So after our dwarves make it into Lake Town and are almost thrown in jail for being there, I guess you're just not allowed to go places in this world without immediately being thrown in a dungeon or arrested. Thorin is able to inspire the men of Lake Town when he reveals the fact that he is the Mountain King. And then if they let them go and they reclaim the treasure within Erebor, the dwarves will help rebuild the city to the great days of old when it was once the city of Dale. And of course this promise will eventually be broken, but the people agree to it because, well, I guess they have nothing to lose. Their lives are already shit anyway, and even though there's a high chance that Smaug will just come and kill them all again, even the slightest thought of their city being returned to its former glory is enough to make them let the dwarves go. And so it is. Although a couple of dwarves stay behind in Lake Town due to events that happened earlier in the movie, the majority of the company sets off for Erebor, which is now only less than a day's journey away. As the dwarves make their way to the mountain, the excitement in me really starts to rise, because now we're getting to the best part of the trilogy, the part that the whole story has revolved around and what we've all been waiting for. So as the company makes its way to the spot where the hidden door is supposed to be, they almost fail to complete the quest because the riddle of the hidden door ends up being a kind of riddle inside of a riddle. And I really like the fact that it's Bilbo who's the one that figures out that it's the last moon of autumn, not the last sunset, that will open the door. And he's the one who effectively saves the quest. Thorin pushes the door open, and finally, we have reached the inside of Erebor. And what follows is the best scene of the movie. But before I touch on that, I do want to quickly touch on Gandalf's side quest, which I kept forgetting was a thing throughout the film. So Gandalf is bouncing around a bunch of different places, and when he eventually makes his way to Dol Guldur, he discovers that Sauron is indeed back from the dead. And I already discussed it a little bit in part 1, but my main issue with the side plot of The Hobbit is it isn't really needed and takes time away from the much needed development of some of our characters in the main plot. I can see why they might have thought that implementing elements of The Lord of the Rings might have been beneficial so that casual fans of Middle-earth could feel some sort of connecting tissue between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. But the problem is that this content that's sort of setting up The Lord of the Rings doesn't really have anything to do with The Hobbit story at all, and as a result really weakens the trilogy a lot. When you ask someone their criticisms of the Hobbit trilogy, a lot of times the majority of the issues they'll give you is stuff revolving around the subplot, so I know I'm not alone in my criticisms of this. Alright, enough of the bad shit. Let's get into the meat of the Desolation of Smaug, which is the Smaug Sequence. Right from the very get-go, this scene had me so invested. Bilbo walks alone into a kingdom under the mountain, with gold that stretches for miles, the finest jewels and gems in the world, but is guarded by an evil, fire-breathing dragon. Out of all the scenes in The Hobbit, this one gives me the most mythological vibes. And as some of you may know, I am a sucker for the mythological aesthetic. This scene right from the get-go has tension levels through the roof. As Bilbo's walking through the mountains of gold, we know that one slip-up could mean shit hitting the fan. And when it eventually does, it's an absolute nail-biter for the rest of the scene because we know that Bilbo is screwed. From the moment that Smaug wakes up, they immediately establish his imposing screen presence. And one way that they do this is through the incredible cinematography. Almost every single shot of Bilbo is a relatively close-up shot on a downward angle, while almost every shot of Smaug is an extreme long, wide-angle shot on an upward angle. This really helps give the feeling of Bilbo and Smaug as if we're an ant versus a god. Also, it can't go without saying that Benedict Cumberbatch's performance as Smaug is absolutely fantastic. You can tell that he put everything he had into this role, and the end product is so convincing. Not once did I ever think about the fact that behind that dragon was a guy crawling around on the floor in a motion capture suit. You totally buy into the fact that that's a real dragon and a real force of nature. Another thing that they do that I actually really like is when Smaug wakes up, he doesn't go apeshit immediately and try to start killing Bilbo. He teases him and plays with him a little bit, which I think provided a natural build-up to the action that follows. It also coincidentally, I think, gives us a sense of Smaug's power before he even has to use it. Bilbo is effectively begging for his life, and Smaug teases him and talks about how he's going to kill him before he actually attempts to do it. And we know he has the power to just snap and incinerate him whenever he wants. Now that's power. When the dwarves eventually make their way into the mountain in an attempt to save Bilbo, we then get what I think is the best action set pieces in the entire trilogy. I can only assume that there are probably people out there that felt like this scene needed to be chopped down a little bit, but for me it's actually just about the perfect length. It's not too short that it leaves us wanting more, but it's not too long that it overstays its welcome. I also greatly enjoyed just how unique and fun each different part of this sequence was. It was overall just such a pleasure to watch and was definitely the high point of the Hobbit trilogy. The scene ends with Smaug deciding that before he finishes off the dwarves, he's going to pay a visit to the people of Lake Town, giving us the perfect cliffhanger for the Battle of the Five Armies, with the final words uttered out of his mouth being, "I am fire, I am death." and the movie ends. Overall, I greatly enjoyed The Desolation of Smaug, and it's definitely my favorite film from the Hobbit trilogy. It does start out a little bit slow, but I think it starts to pick up its pace as the film goes on. It does lose a little bit of steam during the Lake Town sequence, but finishes extremely strong with about 45 minutes of what is, in my opinion, sheer fucking brilliance. It for sure still has its flaws, like all the Hobbit movies do, but out of the 3 films, I think that the flaws are the least present in The Desolation of Smaug. And even people that hate the Hobbit trilogy, I think can still find at least some enjoyment in this film. Well, that's gonna do it for this video, guys, bringing an end to part 2 and my thoughts of The Desolation of Smaug. If you made it this far and you enjoyed this video, definitely make sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button. If you want to be notified about when I post part 3, where I'll be taking a look at the Battle of the Five Armies, make sure to turn on that notification bell. But anyways, that's all I got for today. I'll see you next time.